welcome to episode 133 of Authors Afterword. On this podcast, I talk to an author about one, occasionally more, of their books in detail. And if you find yourself enjoying today's episode, do share it with your friends. I'm Charlie Place, and joining me today is Juhea Kim, most recently of the short story collection A Love Story from the End of the World, which combines some of Juhea's fiction back catalogue. There is some environmental-focused sci-fi set in a world that is actually looked at in, I believe, a few stories and seem to be ordered in the book so that the world moves along in time. I'm going to start on that in a moment. There is a lot of animal conservation content that's difficult to read, but important, and there are stories that feel a bit more present day. It's one of the best collections I've read. Hello, Juhea.
Hi, Charlie. I'm so excited to be here, and thank you so much for that wonderful introduction.
It has been an absolute amazing time reading your story. I love it. So I'll get to what I was mentioning there. The order of the stories, because I believe these stories were written over a different period of time. They're compiled. So can we talk about the ordering, the hows and the whys and the general,
The order is roughly in the order in which they were written. The 10 stories encompass 10 years from 2015 to 2024. And the very first story, Biodome, was written in 2015. I still remember I wrote that in one weekend, and it was one of the first times I was still trying to gain my footing as a literary fiction writer. And it opened a lot of doors for me, that story. It has been optioned to be adapted into film, which is very exciting. And I look at the list of contents, and each story brings me back to the time in my life where I wrote this and when. The second story is from a trip to the south of France in 2019, and A Woman's Life in 10 Scenes also later in 2019. The South African story just a little bit before that in 2018, but mostly, again, chronological until the final story, the title story that you mentioned in your intro, A Love Story from the End of the World, which was the penultimate story that I wrote. I actually wrote the very autobiographical sounding Notting Hill just days before I had to turn in the manuscript. And they had already made me an offer for the book based on 9 stories. And they said, stop writing. And I said, wait, but I have a really great idea. I really want to add a 10th story. So I wrote the Notting Hill story as a more romantic story. But I wanted to end it on a note of that moving, that poignancy that you mentioned, which is why the title story ended up being the final one.
Yeah, because that is the story in terms of animal conservation, that theme. That is the story. I think it's one of, if not the, I think it's one of the animals that actually makes it out of your stories alive, which I thought was very fitting as well.
I really wanted to end on a note of realism, but also hope. I think that that story made me tear up, but also feel that there is a point to all of this and that there is optimism still to be had.
Yeah, it's got a kind of double meaning at the end of the human mum and the polar bear mum, which is quite special. It almost felt a bit magical realism, actually, the ending to me, which was rather lovely.
Yeah, so before this book, before this story collection, I was most known for these long classical realist novels, writing in the tradition of probably 19th century realism. And what's wonderful about the short story form is that you can experiment with different tones that are lighter, but no less impactful. Now, of course, it's possible to infuse magic realism into a novel. But for me, that fable-like tone really lends itself well to the short format. And I do turn to that in at least a few of these stories, especially when I am describing children or animals, because they are the innocent. And sometimes that really works well to create the right ambiance and the right emotional tone.
That's very true, yes. I'm thinking of your elephant story that was...
Exactly. Exactly. I think of KwaZulu-Natal as it's realist, but also a bit of a fable. So it's
Hmm.
set in a certain place and time. It identifies by the geographical location in South Africa, but the time period is also vague. So we hear about Rocky, Sylvester Stallone is mentioned by name, but we also don't know exactly what time, what year it is, and it almost seems to exist in this mythical plane.
Yeah.
That was definitely something intentional to really capture that timeless feel of a friendship between a human boy and an elephant.
Hmm. Well, I'm going to just springboard off there onto time because going back to Biodome, but also the other stories that seem to be in this kind of futuristic world that you've built, you do look at time in there as well. You've got the literal time. I think it's Biodome. You've got a kind of a Groundhog Day almost structure there. And there are other stories that do that. Is time in general important to you in these short stories?
The Groundhog Day happens in BioArc, so you're absolutely right.
I got that wrong. Sorry. Yeah.
Wrong, but also right, because you're definitely thinking of the fact that Biodome and BioArc are sort of bookend stories.
Mm.
They're framing each other, they're mirror images in a certain sense. Biodome ends on a more optimistic note, and I think BioArc ends on a note where, well, because I am human, this is as far as I'll go. So, time, the notion of time, is that something that I was thinking about while writing this? Yes, and definitely more in certain stories than others.
Sure.
But I think in BioArc, I wanted to explore the idea that time isn't just linear and that there are these different ideas about physics where time isn't linear, but what if just like light can be broken down into photons? What if time can be broken down into chronons? And they not only run from this linear axis, but also spreads.
Yeah.
And I wanted to play with that concept because as somebody who's living in 2025, I do feel pretty bleak a lot of the times. And I feel like we are headed in the wrong direction of history. And all science is telling us that things are probably too late. This is just fact. I don't want to sound negative, but scientists have been telling us this for decades now, and that time has already passed because I've been learning about this, studying this, hearing the news since at least 15 or 20 years ago. And they already said that by 2020, by 2025, things have to have shifted, and they really haven't meaningfully. If we're already on the wrong side of history, if we're already past that threshold, it makes me feel as though nothing that I can do now is meaningful. But if we were to think that maybe time is something that is much more multidimensional and everything that we do affects everything around us. If we think of our realities as occurring at a certain point in a chronon, and everything that we do is affecting every chronon around us, what if what we are doing now can also affect things backwards, forwards, and around us instead of just always, always heading towards the end of the world? So, BioArc is quite a bleak story at the end, but it also has that message that our reality right now isn't the only thing. And the most important thing is how you act isn't affecting you just yourself, but it's affecting everything around you, from your past to your future to those around you. It's quite a complex idea to articulate, but I think it's something that's possible in fiction. And I think we have poetry and prose because these hard to rationalize ideas and concepts are perhaps easier to turn into a metaphor in the form of poetry and prose. So hopefully these stories will inspire a feeling that I'm not the only one that I am affecting. I am affecting the world around me. And that is the meaning of my life. Physically, I think it's just fascinating to also think about me as not just existing here, but like this space that I'm taking up is changing every atom around me and possibly also the world. That kind of feeling I wanted to capture in the form of fiction.
That's interesting. And what you said about capturing things we need to say in metaphor, I mean, that's very true, isn't it? Because I'm going to use the word easier. It makes it easier for people to understand, but also it allows you to delve into it in a certain detail that is maybe, or is, more easy to digest, but also, I want to say, like, compelling, comprehensive than if you literally just say the words sometimes. It just delivers it in a different manner.
Exactly. I think fiction or prose or poetry is important to us because everything is metaphor. And by that I mean things that are not meaningful in the world are those that can be taken at face value. For example, a car, an automobile, it doesn't really stand for something. Okay, like no matter how much car companies will try to come up with the commercial that says otherwise, a car is just a car. It's not about something else, right? And things like that that can be taken at face value are not ultimately that meaningful. Things that are meaningful to us are basically metaphors for something else. These stories, maybe on a very literal level, let's think about Biodome. On the surface level, it's a story about a dome that's covering the city of Seoul in the near future. And it's about the environmental impact and how people can't get out of the dome, but they cease to even remember that the dome exists. And now they're just happy living under the biodome. So that's what it's saying on the surface level. But we, of course, know that that's not the meaning of the story. The meaning of the story is the fact that when humans are alienated from nature, when they are cut off from nature, they also lose their own humanity. So it's all a symbolism. And I think that these metaphors are the things that we really need to focus on, especially now when we're so surrounded by things that are meaningless.
Yeah, yeah. I'm going to ask about the ending of Biodome, because I think actually your answer to this is going to bring more light to the rest of the collection in a way. You've got the ending of Biodome, and I do mean Biodome this time. I'm not saying Bioarc, it is Biodome. And I was surprised, but not in a bad way, because I thought there was going to be more story after the ending. I think it's at the bottom of the page you turn over, and I was surprised that it was finished. And I thought we were going to follow our character on his journey outside the biodome, even if quickly. And yeah, I found it very precise where you ended it. Can you talk about your choice of where to end these stories? That one and in general.
Can I be completely honest with you? That's where you can see that that's the first story that I've written in this collection. If you were to ask me what would happen in a story that you write now, and the ending will almost certainly close the loop. That's the style for which I am best known. All of my novels end in a very like huge closure way, emotionally, plot-wise, everything just comes together, like it fits. And a lot of these stories make a big circle. One story I wrote very intentionally as an elliptical story or parabolic. So it creates a different shape, but that was also intentional. The ending is less of a closure, but goes through the full cycle. And with this first story written in 2015, I didn't feel that need to give such a great closure because I was just feeling very experimental and, I didn't have this huge weight over my shoulders that I have to deliver such an emotional closure ending, pow at the end. At this stage, I was still trying to gain a literary agent and just having fun on the page. And what happened was that because it has such an open end, I think that's why it gained quite a bit of interest in Hollywood because of that. Because when filmmakers read short stories to adapt, they like to see a lot of possibility and they could see how this could be expanded. And that's what they welcome more in a short story than something that is like a little miniature world complete. So I think that my style has developed more and matured more into definitely having a sense of closure at the end. And that's probably just who I am as a person. But when I read other authors' short story collections, I realize that the open end is much more common, in my view. So it really just depends on what feels right to you in the moment, even in the moment in your author career, like what feels right to you. Yeah.
No, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, I wouldn't have thought necessarily, partly because I didn't know when all of your fiction was published originally, but it made me think a lot, the ending.
Yeah.
And I definitely think it's because you don't go further. You do let so much of it go to the reader to decide.
Yeah.
So it does naturally make you focus on what you've read for longer. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's the beauty of that open ending of a short story. Compare that to the last story that I wrote in this collection, which is Notting Hill. And you can see how structurally they're so dissimilar because Notting Hill will give you crumbs and then by the end it will have picked up all the crumbs. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
If I put something down, I will pick it up by the end and then it all makes sense, like a little Fabergé egg or something. So there's a joy in writing one kind of story and there's a different kind of joy in a different story. And with this collection, the beauty is that I didn't have to just choose one tone, emotional tone or one type of structure or one voice. They could all be kind of their own thing and unique. And some of these stories are very funny, I think, and others are much more serious. And I didn't have to just pick one or the other.
Yeah, there is a variety of tones and genres as well. I'm going to ask you first about the film adaptation because you've mentioned it, so we may as well cover that now. What can you tell us about it at this point?
The formal press release has not gone out, but I can reveal that it is being developed into a feature film by a production company that has done other types of book to series adaptations for places like HBO and Apple TV, specifically sci-fi literary fiction. So very much this alley. And it actually recently won a competition by the City of Seoul Film Commission to gain development funding for the film. It was a really competitive round, and there were only one of two screenplays that were picked, and I was really excited about that. And you will see a lot more development from this small short story. There will be different characters. We're going to go deeper into the relationship between Gina and Park. Gina is going to have a whole backstory from her point of view. So it's going to also develop more of their love story, the sense of missed connection and how they don't understand each other, which is very true to form of modern dating.
That's great then, because often you worry about losing content, I suppose. I know I do as a reader. If a film's coming out, I'm like, oh gosh, what are they going to cut to make it fit a film? But it sounds like this is going to be the other way, that it's just going to just blossom so much more, and that's brilliant.
I love certain very atmospheric Asian films. Like In the Mood for Love is one of my favorite films. It's by
Wong Kar-wai.
exactly. And I can see that based on these development things that they have sent to me, that they're going to dream of something very moody and very beautiful and filmic. And I'm super excited for that world come alive with the colors and the textures. Yeah, I think it's going to be great.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, I thoroughly look forward to seeing what's going on in the updates. That would be great. I'm going to quickly go back to Notting Hill just to ask you, because it struck me you've written this in the second person, and in terms of the story collection itself, that is the only one, and listeners know that I really like the second person, so I was all over this story. I wondered, because you talk about, oh gosh, I can't remember what The man's name is the boss. He is moaning about the written work that's being submitted, and he's talking about, oh, it says this, that, and the other, and there's a reference to the second person. So, of course, I was there going, oh, is this why you've chosen the second person? Can you tell us about this narrative?
That is totally a joke.
Okay.
First of all, I am pretty sure that that is the definition of dramatic irony because the reader is able to know that the second person thing is supposed to be a joke. Okay, let's really explain what's going on here. This protagonist is a writer for a nonprofit, and she wrote a sentence that goes along the lines of, you can make a difference by adopting different sustainable lifestyle habits. And her boss reads this press release and says, you have written this in second person. So therefore, this is bad. But we know that that's not what it means to write in second person. She was just saying you can make a difference, but she wasn't writing from a you point of view. She's saying he doesn't even know what second person POV means. And we're having a laugh due to this dramatic irony of the fact that we're reading something written in second person, which is supposed to be a bad thing. So that's sort of a little in joke there. And they do say, not Charlie, excepting Charlie, people do generally say writing in second person sounds a lot like MFA writing, showy, and maybe gimmicky. So it's not recommended that you lean hard into the second person. But I had already written 9 different stories in this collection. So I was trying to do something more lighthearted, more fun. And I already knew that the second person critique was going to come in because that was somebody that I worked for who criticized me for almost the exact same reasons. And she could not understand what was second person and what was third person. So I just thought that that would be something really funny. And it made me chuckle. I think in general, when you can make yourself laugh while writing, that's a pretty good sign that that's going to come across to the reader as well.
Yeah, no, I don't write novels. I write blog posts, but no, I can relate to that. Yeah, definitely. I think I agree. The thing that I really like, I think, about second person is you're always wondering who that second person is, if there's someone kind of behind the pen.
Mm-hmm.
I will put my hand up and say I didn't quite cotton on to who that was in your story, and I get it now, obviously. So that was quite fun.
I think also second person does encourage the reader to get inside the head of the protagonist because it's constantly telling you that you're the one who's living this life. I think with that story, it can resonate with pretty much any woman. It's an every woman story. So this character, who's a 36-year-old unwed woman who has had long-term boyfriends before, but never got that close to marriage, and she moves to Notting Hill for love. I thought that it would be really fun for the reader to really feel inside her shoes. She doesn't have to be named a certain thing. She could be anyone. She could be Norma or Lauren. It doesn't matter. You could relate to that situation. So that's why it ended up being a second person story.
This has been a fun conversation on that. I would like to ask about Mountain Island and its various themes. I liked that story, it was good. And it had a fantastic ending with the Schrodinger's cat. But yeah, could you talk about Mountain Island and its themes? And
most short stories, and in fact, novels that I write, come to me in a split second. Within an hour or two, I have already figured out an entire novel in my head. And with short stories as well, I usually get an idea. It doesn't let me go until I'm done with it. And the same thing happened with Mountain Island. It's a very tightly constructed story. I believe it's less than 5,000 words, which is as compact as it can get whilst having a believable narrative structure, right? Instead of a flash fiction. It's tightly wound. I loved that about that story because I knew from the way I began that I already knew where all of this would fit and where it would end up. And after I was finished with it, I felt this great sense of catharsis and grief, but also a good grief And it's a pretty sad story, but also humorous. I love when I'm able to capture different moods simultaneously in a story. Because if something's just funny, then it doesn't have enough substance. Most of life isn't funny or lighthearted. In fact, life is pretty hard. Life has a lot of darkness. So, in order for fiction to be called literature, not just fun stories, it should strive to capture some of life's darkness and shadows. But if I only write with shadows, then it becomes like a painting that's just using black paint. And I didn't want that. So Mountain Island is a story about little boys living in a landfill. And it's described as a region where Pacific and Indian Oceans meet. And the island is fictional, but there are real places in this world just like this island. For example, in Indonesia, where they have collected huge landfills out of not just their own litter, but garbage from other countries that they import for money. Wealthier countries pay these poorer countries to accept their trash, which means eventually they have these huge landfills. And real people right now in 2025 live in these landfills, go to school, raise their children there, make food there by burning garbage. This is fact. And I wanted to write about this so that people would actually want to read about it because it's heartbreaking. And our first response to tragedy is to become numb and desensitized and just swipe to the next story. I wanted to make sure that this story had enough color and enough beauty and warmth to justify exposing the darkness. And I think I balanced that pretty well in Mountain Island. It's funny because I definitely laughed out loud while writing it and also cried for my own characters. So I hope you really enjoy it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you've definitely got the humour straight away in the K-pop band, which does sound a thinly veiled BTS almost, I think. But
Well, yes, that's true. You know what? A lot of my fans are fans of BTS as well, and I hope they don't read this and become very angry at me. I hope not. But here's the thing. I have no disrespect towards K-pop stars or people who listen to K-pop, but even this recent phenomenon called K-pop Demon Hunters, I don't know if you've seen it on Netflix.
haven't seen that, no.
Okay, so apparently that's the global number one hit, or Netflix is one of the most popular films of all time called K-pop Demon Hunters. I was watching it last night. It's quite funny in certain parts. It's not all bad. However, I do question this devotion to something that is so so superficial because I don't think they're striving for depth. I don't think that they're striving for timeless art by any means. And I mean, of course, nothing has to be that serious all the time. I'm not a serious person all the time, but why is it that we are giving so much of our love and devotion and focus and time and money to these things that are very sparkly and packaged and commercial and not things of real substance and humanity? And I did want to go into that with this story.
Sure, sure. Yeah, you're also making me think of all the various things in the background that we're told about Korean pop as well that we can't go into today, but yeah, it's making me think of that. There's philosophical stuff. So I don't want to give the full quotation because I know I was reading an arc and you don't want to quote that just in case it's changed. So if I just say, I noted two passages that blew me away from different stories. One about things existing, then humans knowing of it, and if reality was limited to our understanding, the universe wouldn't exist. I love that. And I think that was in Tree of Life. The other was in this, as we said, the concept of using Schrodinger's cat in terms of God being the cat. You don't know about his existence, etc., until you die. And then obviously you've got the philosophical conversations between the two professors. Can you talk more about this? Is that something you can talk about I suppose, without using the entire time and stuff like that?
Oh my goodness. These are sort of separate issues, but I think they're all touching on the existence of the unknown and potentially God.
Yeah.
And I am a religious person, actually. I'm Catholic, I'm a practicing Catholic. Faith is coming more and more into my fiction, so much so that this is my third book, and you're seeing hints of faith and questions of faith in this book. And my fourth book is called The Divine Comedy, and it will really go into the question of death. Is there an omnipotent and all good God when there's so much tragedy in the world? How do we make sense of that paradox? Actually, I think that question already exists in this book. So let me reiterate that question, and I think it's important for all of us. We hear that God is good and that God is all powerful. If so, why is there so much suffering and suffering of the innocents in the world? Is that not a paradox? Now, I have reached a point in my life, and I am 38, that I want to say that this appears to be paradox, but in faith, we have to understand it as a mystery. It's a mystery because we don't know how to rationalize it, but a paradox means everything is meaningless, nihilism. Therefore, there is no God, there is no meaning, there's no real meaning to humanity. We create our own meaning, but that's about it. So there's a real sense of nihilism there. Or you can accept these contradictions as a mystery that we don't yet have the power to explain and prove. I want to be able to show that it's a mystery that we're living, and we're living with the questions, but with the belief that the questions will have a beautiful and true answer through fiction. I think art is probably the only method we have to show that. And so these stories contain questions like Schrodinger's cat. A cat is both alive and dead until you open the box, and that is when you die. These little boys are trying to understand, if God exists, then why are our lives so bad? And they're trying to answer to each other and saying, well, maybe he does exist, but we're going to find out later. And I think these kind of earnest questions that are being asked are by themselves very touching. And I think the fact that these human characters are constantly trying to ask and answer these questions, that fact on its own is giving us some sense of hope.
Okay. So, and I'm going to ask this without expecting you to explain your own views. I suppose then in your writing now, that's helping you work out your own questions.
Oh, absolutely. Oh my goodness. It's a constant feedback loop of me experiencing something in real life, giving me, the human me, real understanding about life. And I want to immediately pour that into my art. But whilst writing, whilst creating, I also understand some more things, and it feeds back into me, the human being. And both of these directions are equally important. And people always ask me, what should I do to become a better writer? And actually, one of the most frequently asked questions is, how do you do research? Your research is so good. Like, what did you do? And for years, I answered this. And then I realized, oh, what they're actually asking isn't how to do research, because most people with the internet and Wi-Fi can do research now. That's not the question that they're asking. They're asking, if I do the research part, then does that make me a good writer? Like, how do I be a good writer? How do I become a good writer? And my answer now is, well, you need to first observe the world, and you need to learn things about life, and you need to have a deeper understanding, and things have to touch you, and things maybe have to break your heart a little bit. But these are the things that are important for you to write, more so than research, because now anybody who can use Google can learn quite a bit of things. The research is not the important part. But the writer's job, I think, it starts with observing things that are outside of you. Stop looking at yourself so much, because you already think about yourself all the time. You study yourself constantly 24/7. And that's where a lot of these solipsism comes in of modern life. But I recommend people to go take a walk and turn off your phone, go smell the roses, touch the trees. This is so stupid, but I'll go touch trees. I'll pet the little snails on a rainy day like today. I'll look at the bees, I'll pet the bumblebees. Look at the small things of the world, and the small things of the world have their own laws, and it is so beautiful. And once you really look at the world from another being's point of view, even from a bee's point of view, you start to empathize more, you learn a lot more, and therein lies a lot of the stories. That's where I would say the realizations and the life lessons come from.
Yeah, nature is obviously the ultimate reality. Yes. Yeah, that's interesting. You're making me think that, I mean, I don't know how many people or if anyone is doing things quite like you, but you're kind of doing religious art in a very unique new form.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So, yeah, religious art, I'm not ashamed of that. Although I do know that in the Anglophone world, probably around the world actually, it has become very unfashionable to be religious and anti-intellectual to be religious. To admit to faith is like saying you're not rigorous enough, you're not intellectual enough. And I quite disagree with that for obvious reasons. I think I write very intellectually and rigorously. It doesn't mean that you're not smart, therefore you have faith. I actually think it means that you've thought deeply enough and now you return to it. So it's not because you're naive that you have to have faith. I think it's when you have exhausted all of your human ways to rationalize and figure things out and realize that there is a limit to what we can do, that you have that. These stories don't have an obvious religious themes, but I think that in the end, it has that note of belief in the greater good that is probably religious in tone.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, you have one story, I think it's Older Sister, that's the religion is part of the family, which is obviously people are religious. So, yeah, that makes sense. I think we've got to ask you more about what you are writing now. Is there any more that you can expand on?
It's called The Divine Comedy, and it's inspired by obviously Dante's The Divine Comedy, as well as one of my favorite books of all time, The Master and Margarita by Bulgakov. And as you can tell from both of these stories, they have supernatural elements. So this is going to be sort of the 19th century realist voice that I am most known for, explaining the ascent of a Korean American woman who graduates from Princeton in 2009 and moves to New York and goes through all these struggles with her group of friends and lovers and eventually becomes an author. So you can pretty much make out from that outline that this is going to be a character that's heavily based upon me. However, there will be a supernatural parallel storyline following an angel. And this will be a man from medieval Italy, and he wakes up in heaven and he's assigned to become a guardian angel. And from that point on, he's tasked with guarding and guiding souls eventually to heaven. And we'll follow him through these different time periods and places. He's leading humans mostly, but sometimes animals. And we're going to understand towards the end how this Korean American woman in modern New York and how this angel named Francesco meet and the storylines merge by the end.
Okay, that's going to be very interesting. Juhea, it has been lovely having you today and discussing your marvellous collection, and I'm very much looking forward to your next book. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Charlie.
I do hope you enjoyed this episode. Do join me next time. And if you have a moment to spare, please do leave a rating and/or review of this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Podcast Addict. Thank you. Authors Afterword episode 133 was recorded on the 29th of August and published on the 24th of November 2025. Music and production by Charlie Place.